May 4th, that'll be the next portion of this. It's a 3-part series, and the whole video does take you up, I believe up to like 2006. So what we'll do is, be going through all of the history from our beginning all the way to around 2006. So I hope that you'll be able to come on purpose to bring 1 or 2 other people with you when you come the next time to see the next portion of it. And the people, we have our panel. I'd like to call them up and open up the floor for questions, anything that you may want to ask, anything that brought you up, questions that came to mind when you were watching this. Like I said, I know I had tons of questions the first time I heard it. Barb, Providence, Chaplain Davis, Jackie, Matt, as our panel tonight. Come on, Barb. I just wanted to, thank you all for coming to our, Black History Month event, and we look forward to your questions. Moderator here.
Anybody have any questions?
For those of us who are impatient and do not wish to wait for May 4th, I want my own copy of this.
Oh, okay.
Where can we get one?
Well, if you want, you can.
They can record their email address on there.
Yeah,
and we can just forward to the link.
Yeah, we can get you a copy if you've signed up on, for the sign-in sheet. If you want to try, get a copy of it, and then let me know, or you can email me, either one, and let me know that you want a copy of it, and we'll forward you a link, or you can order it through the Frederick Douglass Foundation, either one. Okay.
Thank you. One of the things that I know from my own study of American history, and there was a lot here that I did not know, there's also a lot that I did know. By definition and by legislation in the antebellum South, African Americans were prohibited from learning to read and write. And it's a historical reality that a large number of early elected legislators in the South, partly because of the, I think, justified under the circumstances, disenfranchisement of Southern pro-slavery whites. But the negative result was a lot of African Americans who by law and by intimidation were not educated, did not know history. A lot of these people served in legislatures. And a lot of these people were used, manipulated by that class of people known as carpetbaggers, who saw this as an opportunity to exploit Southern whites through the use of manipulating Southern blacks, which in itself gives rise to the kind of resentment that gave rise to the Klan. I mean, that's only one reason. There was obviously the inveterate racism that promoted that. But I think the fire was certainly stoked, probably with gasoline, by a lot of the corruption that took place. Historically, does this video deal with that? Because I think that's a piece of the puzzle. As I look at the kind of rebellions that are happening all over the world right now, particularly in the Muslim world, I have the same concern that a lot of people who don't understand history or government are being used by other forces that theoretically should be pro-democracy, pro-Republican, but in reality are using the very people as fodder for their own agendas. And I was just wondering if the video addresses that, and if some members of the panel could address that, because I think that's a big piece of it as well.
Sure, I can address that.
I mean, you are correct. I mean, we have politicians who have used people for those purposes. And the video does address that, because studying the history of every African American that served in Congress had an education from a college up north. They moved back down south, and they got elected. So we can't say that just because they were there, they were used. These men were educated. I mean, they had degrees. So they just didn't have the opportunity to be elected to Congress.
That was the situation in U.S. Congress, I agree.
Yes.
What I'm speaking of is in the local southern state legislatures. That was not the case in a lot of situations.
Well,
I'm not saying that black people were blamed for that. I'm just saying that it was part of...
Okay, go ahead.
No, that's okay.
Well, see, the thing is, what we have today is we have affirmative action programs. That's usury. That's putting people in positions who are not qualified. But back then, blacks were prohibited. So when slavery was ended, they had a chance to come out of the closet and say, hey, I have a degree from a college up north. Now I have the capacity and I have the authority to run for Congress. So these were the men that Republicans elected by state legislature. They were elected to Congress. They were totally qualified. There's plenty of books out there, and one in particular is called Capital Men. It lists all of the Republican legislators of the South who were elected. And these guys were very, very educated. In fact, we had one who was a licensed dentist and a physician. So, but you couldn't say it because the Democrats would have killed you. So you had to wait until slavery was abolished. So now they came out of the closet with their education. And they was elected Congress.
So these were free blacks who basically went north and in essence smuggled their education into the South.
And when slavery was abolished, they returned to the South, along with so-called carpetbaggers, okay? But these men escaped slavery from the South, and they were educated and went back. Because now they have the opportunity to make change, and that's exactly what happened.
There was also the...
Go ahead.
There was also those slaves that were educated by their white slave masters that actually weren't, didn't believe in slavery, but still had slaves from one way or another, family, husband, and they would bring them in, Frederick Douglass being one of them, who were taught to read and write, although they couldn't let on that they were able to read and write, because not only would they get in trouble, but so would the people that taught them how to read and write. So there was a lot of other undercurrent things like that went on throughout, I guess, the South. And like you said, that people went up north coming back, and then being able to say, oh yeah, by the way, I can read,
Now the video does point it out.
the video is...
This is just, I just had to get to the Klan part. I wanted to get to that first.
It's a nice teaser.
I mean, did I answer your question? I mean...
Yeah, as I said, I was aware of the situation in Congress.
Yeah.
My question is more aimed at some of the things that went on with local legislatures.
Yeah.
And also along the lines of when the people have been oppressed for a long time, there are both just and unjust ways of dealing with it. Good example, when my ancestors came to this country from, Sicily. No, I'm not going to make you an offer you can't refuse. But, the people who did it the right way accepted the most menial jobs to start with, got their kids educated to the next level, and we arrived. But there were others who wanted to do their own thing. The Italian word for that is Cosa Nostra, which is the mafia. They didn't want to wait. They didn't want to do it the right way, and so they worked outside the law. And I think part of human nature is there's always going to be an element in any group that has been oppressed to want to take vengeance or hit back. That is not typical, but it is there. And I was wondering if part of the rise of the Klan might have been an unjust response to some people. You know what I'm trying to say? That there's always that element on both sides.
Sure. But I hate to just,
No, go ahead.
Anybody else want to add? Okay, go right ahead. Okay. I mean, you know, being the student of history, you know, and being from North Carolina myself, you know, I've lived in towns of population 2,000 or 3,000, something like that, and I've dealt with the Klan lots of times. Okay, and what happens is that when certain people are oppressed for so long, and you're now looking at people because you know, they've been in slavery, black people have been in slavery, you're just not going to accept this overnight. And then at the same time, you turn around and confiscate my land and turn around and want to give it to the free blacks. That's inappropriate to a Southern Democrat who just lost his land. Especially when a Republican stands up and says, okay, we're going to give free blacks 40 acres and a mule. And the Democrats say, no, you're not. So they went and created the KKK to persecute black and white Republicans in order to prevent this from happening. So what we got as a result later on was sharecropping. So you can't have my land, but if you plant for me, you know, we can split this thing up. So I can understand that people were upset when land was taken from them when they lost the Civil War. But what I refuse to get into my head here is that, you know, you built this land off slavery, so now it's time to stop it now. So just because you're the KKK and you don't want this to happen, okay, something has to give here. So I understand the frustration of the Democrats who formed this, you know, this terrorist organization. I understand that. So I don't, you know, I can't really put them down for that because this is their lifestyle. But what I have to say is that, you know, as a black American, something had to give. Something had to give, and I would prefer to have freedom for people who will appreciate that freedom, even if it means sharecropping or dealing with the KKK. So you know, I really understand that, but I just can't side with the terrorist organization who feels that, okay, this is my land, but that land was bought and secured with my blood, and it's time to begin to look at things the right way and put it in the right perspective.
When they gave the statistics about slave owners, you know, the Democrats were saying, well, you know, only 5% of Southerners own slaves, and then they broke it down saying, well, in actuality, it was, you know, 2/3 were, you know, either slave owners or slaves or, you know, in the family. So what is the actual number? Is that 5% accurate as far as actual slave owners, or is it a bigger number, or I guess, like, what's the actual percentage? Do we have an accurate number?
Well, the 5% slave owner is an accurate number, but you had, I believe I want to say it was around 80% of the South had some had something to do with slavery that was of an economic benefit to them. So although that 5% is a very accurate number of how many people own slaves, there was a lot larger number of people that were affected by slavery, and if it were to, you know, end, whether it be, you know, the cotton and that's being picked, all of a sudden now that's going to go up because you're no longer going to have, you know, that cheap material that's going to be promoted. So of course, you know, so they had vested interest to make sure that slavery stayed there, although they may not morally wanted it there. You know, that economic side of it still would draw them to say, yeah, let's, you know, try and keep it. But, you know, it wasn't a large population, you know, otherwise if there was a majority of people that wanted to keep slavery even in the South, then we would still have slavery.
Anyone? Okay, you want to get, okay.
No, I was just going to say something similar to what Ayesha said, that most of the people in the South, slavery was their primary industry, so the businesses around them benefited. Everyone else all had a part in like she said, a vested interest in keeping slavery going, whether it was the actual slave owner or the person that benefited from the cotton that they picked or they made clothes or whatever. So it was a big industry down there. So the 5%, like she said, of the slave owners was accurate, but the whole industry as a whole, they needed that institution to keep the South going. That was like their moneymaker. So when you're talking about abolishing slavery, you're talking about really destroying their industry and their money. And so it was a money issue for people. And so they really fought hard to keep that institution going.
And you see that with abortion even today. You know, although there's a lot of people that, with abortion, you see the same type of thing where you see a large amount of people that may not morally be okay with it, but they still continue to promote it because they do have a vested interest in it financially. The abortion industry, it's, you know, billions of dollars. So, you know, you could just close yourself off and say, oh, I'm not going to think about that. I just want the money.
And just so we don't get it confused, all slave owners were not white. There was a guy named Anthony Ellis. He was one of the largest slave owners in South Carolina. So when we tally up the figures here, you know, and we don't want to think it's just white people, we had 4 million slaves at the time counted in the southern states. 4 million, and that's a lot. That's a lot of people. But fellow blacks actually ran plantations to keep their families together. So a large percentage of that was also